Hey everyone, today I'll be sharing with you how you can figure out what to move in any chess position. Now I know this sounds clickbaity, but trust me, towards the end of this video, I hope to piece everything together and you should be able to move forward with a different approach to the game of chess. Now the first thing we're going to take a look at in today's video is how to evaluate different positions. So we'll take a quick look at two different chess positions and learn how to evaluate them, and at the end I'll put everything together and hopefully it makes sense. Now if you want to skip ahead, I'll leave timestamps below so you can just skip the evaluating positions, but I highly recommend you watch the whole video. Okay, before we jump into evaluating different positions, I would quickly like to mention a few criteria that you're looking for when you're trying to evaluate a chess position. So personally, this is what I do. I first look at king safety, and then I look at piece activity, and then I look at basically the material advantage for both sides, and then finally I look at space and the pawn structures. Now I go in this order, and if you have been watching my previous videos, you'll know why, because I mention a lot about basically keeping the initiative going and try to make threat after threat, and usually this is how I like to play my chess aggressive style. So that's how I also evaluate my chess positions as well. Okay, so first let's take a look at this position. Now, the first thing, as I mentioned before, is looking at king safety. So here white is castled and black has not yet castled, but black is just one move away. So I would say in king safety, both sides are equal. Now, next thing that we look at is piece activity. Now, in terms of piece activity, white has a really nice central knight here, looking into the opponent's territory. Again, the f7 pawn, maybe potentially future sacrifices if the rook goes to e1 and you try to basically pull this bishop away with g4. So there are certain ideas with this e5 knight. It's nicely placed looking into the opponent's territory, so this knight is well placed. Next thing is this bishop. Again, this bishop is very nicely placed in my opinion. It is looking down into the opponent's position, controlling the whole diagonal, and more importantly, which we'll discuss later, is that black has this like semi-open file, and if he ever wants to bring rooks over, this dark squared bishop always covers the b8 square, so I would say it's pretty nicely placed. Now the next thing I'd like to look at is this d2 knight. Again, right now it doesn't look too active, but again it's also about looking at the potential of the piece activity, not the piece itself right now. And this knight has huge potential if it goes to b3, and again it can later go to c5 or a5, and again go further infiltrate into black's position. So white's minor pieces are well placed. Again, this rook will probably swing over to c1 and try to protect the c3 pawn, which is weak, and eventually white will try to push forward with his pawns and the rooks should open up. And again, this queen is nicely placed aligned with the king, as I mentioned earlier, trying to make any knight f7 tactics work in the future, and also more importantly looking at the a6 pawn, which is weak. So white's pieces are pretty active. Now let's take a look at black's pieces. This bishop on e7, this dark squared bishop, I wouldn't say is too active because it's just staring into white's pawn chain. And again, if he could play c5, perhaps this bishop could open up and it would be nice, but he can't do that right now because of our b4 and d4 pawns. So this bishop really can't get any active, so I would say that it's not really that great of a piece. This light squared bishop, however, for black is pretty nice. Again, staring into white's position, pretty much like our dark squared bishop. Again, it's preventing any access to the b1 square if we ever want to push forward with our pawns and try to support them on the queen side. So white's light squared bishop is nicely placed. And looking at black's knight, it's all not that impressive. At first sight, it looks perhaps it's also a really good piece because it can jump to e4 and target the c3 pawn, but it's not quite as powerful as our e5 knight, I would say, because again we're planning to play rook c1 next, and black really has no other ways to target the c pawn other than the knight. More importantly, once the knight gets here, we could even consider playing a move like f3, and again basically kicking this knight out immediately. Of course, we have to be careful because our king is now going to be more open with the queen's diagonal. So we'll probably slide away with king h1 and our king should be fine. So again, black's pieces are active. They have some potential, but not as much as ours. So I would say that in terms of piece activity, our pieces are basically more active. Now the next thing looking at is material count. How I quickly look at it is I first compare the major pieces and then the minor pieces and then the pawns. So first thing when I look at a board, I just see, okay, queen, queen, two rooks. We have two knights and a bishop. Opponent has two bishops and a knight. And then I quickly just take a look at the pawn. So black is missing a b pawn, we're missing an e pawn, and okay, so the pawn count is the same, so it's equal material in that category. Next thing we'll be taking a look at is space and pawn structure. And as you see, white has potential for more space because black really can't push forward too much. And okay, a move like a5, white can even consider pushing forward with b5, again gaining more space. So in terms of space, I feel like right now it's equal, but white has basically, honestly, even right now it's not equal because you have this e5 knight looking into black's territory. So already white has a bit better space, but what I was going to say before is white also has the potential to move forward and infiltrate and gain more space. So I see that potential and give it white a bit more advantage in that category as well. And not to mention the pawn structure. The c6 and a6 pawns are pretty weak again already. The queen and e5, oops, the queen and the e5 knight are targeting them. And again, as I mentioned before, with the potential of our pieces, our piece activity like this knight on d2 coming to b3 and then either jumping to a5 or c5, again it will start putting more pressure on these pawns. So in terms of pawn structure as well, I would say we are better. Our one weakness is c3, but again black really has no way to target it multiple times, and we'll be defending it with moves like rook fc1 and we should be fine. So pawn structure, space, and like piece activity here, I would say white is better. So if we turn on the engine and check the position real quick, you'll see it says plus 0.5, and as you see that next few moves it can even go up to plus 0.8 or even plus 1 depending on what black does. So we aren't that far off from our assessment. So it's about building this intuition by trying to evaluate positions. And as you see here, by trying to evaluate the positions, we already formed a couple of ideas. Like when we tried to figure out piece activity, we realized like, hey, this knight has potential future, and like tactics with taking on f7 if we align our rook with our queen. So that's one idea. Another idea is, okay, we're trying to find the potential with knight on d2, and then we see knight b3 and then moving the knight forward is an idea. So I think you're already picking up on what I want to achieve in this video, and let's move on to the next position, and after that I'll explain more clearly. Okay, so this is going to be the second position of the video, and it's from the same game but another sideline. And the first, and I'd like you to just pause the video and try to evaluate the position on your own, and after you got some sort of assessment or an engine evaluation number, then unpause and compare with mine and then the engines. So first thing I would look at, again as I mentioned before, is king safety, and both kings are castled, and I would say it's fairly equal. And then the next thing I would be looking at is piece activity. So as I mentioned before, it's pretty much the same for this dark squared bishop and this knight. Again, this dark squared bishop is preventing the rooks from easily accessing b8 because there could be potential discoveries with this knight on e5. And again, this knight on e5 is nicely placed. It could always jump in the future and annoy black. However, the knight on d2 for white isn't as basically good as it was in the previous position, because here now it can't really jump to b3 and go anywhere, and it has no purpose there. And another thing is it will just get taken. And the only other square I see is it basically going to f3 and trying to support this knight on e5 and perhaps try to create some sort of attack on the king side, but again really can't right now because the pawn on h6 stops the knight from going to g5 and creating any target on the f7 pawn. And another thing is perhaps it can go to f1 and reroute to e3, but again once it goes there I really don't see what it's going to do. So this knight on d2 doesn't have too great of a potential, not to mention it's also just pinned right now to the white queen. So white's piece activity definitely did decrease from the last position. These rooks as well, I mean, they are staring at the pawn chain. It would be better if they could somehow access the b file and get going, but black's light squared bishop does really nicely, and it prevents the rooks from infiltrating via the b file. And right now it's the a rook trying to create something with a passed pawn, and it's the c rook trying to perhaps open up the position and activate himself. However, it's not easy because black's rooks are also here, and they're also trying to control and open up the position. And now, as you see, black's dark square bishop is also more active. It can perhaps come to b4 next, target this d2 knight, target this a5 pawn. It can also jump to c5 any moment uh, if black wants to put more pressure on f2 and get things to happen once the position opens up. And this knight on f6 is pretty much the same as last time, but there is more potential now for sure, because once it jumps to e4, f3 doesn't feel as safe as to play as last time, because again the bishop is now going to come to c5. And not to mention, even once the knight comes to f3, e4, and if you play f3, the black knight can perhaps jump to c3 in the future. Again, now black has more options, or it can even take on g3. So black's piece activity is much better here. Not to mention, just comparing the queens, white queen is stuck right now protecting the d2 knight, and it really can't get into black's position all that much. It's just trying to keep the defense. Meanwhile, black has just infiltrated into white's position, and this light squared bishop really nicely helps the black queen keep control. And sooner or later, black will start bringing his other pieces and target all these weaknesses that white has. I would say the a5 pawn is passed and it can be used as a strength for white, but right now it could be also pretty easily targeted, as I mentioned before, with the bishop and rook. So that's what I would like to say for piece activity. In terms of material, again, it's same, counting it as before. First look at major pieces and then minor pieces and then the pawns. Another next thing is pace and pawn structure. Now all of a sudden you see black's pawn structure is pretty nice, and it's actually these two pawns for white that can be targeted. Again, it's a bit iffy because they could be used as a strength or a weakness, and it depends on the position. But right now here, white really can't push and make a queen in this position, so this is more of here to be targeted. But if white can hold on, white should get some sort of advantage at this pawn. But right now it's black who's trying to again attack this pawn. So for now in this position, I would say in terms of pawn structure it goes to black as well, because he's the one who's trying to target these pawns and basically using his superior piece activity to try to create some sort of mess. Not to mention space also definitely goes to black as well. As I mentioned before, this knight can now jump in. This bishop is already actively stopping the rooks from coming in, and this queen is already infiltrating into white's position. So here I would say that black is much better, and if we turn on the engine it says minus 1.3, so that's already a quite significant advantage. And if you start looking at the other moves, it slowly only increases to minus 2. So white has to be really careful, as I mentioned before, it's about really just targeting these pawns and also the piece activity. You have much more potential with your pieces on what to move. So in this position, black is much better. Okay, so if you've made it this far, this is the last part of the video, and this is where I'll be putting everything together. Now, in the last two positions, you saw how I was looking at different criteria and basically trying to figure out what the evaluation of this position could be. And one thing that does is sort of build an intuition, so you get a feel for the position. When you start to see like, oh, this piece activity, this space advantage, this pawn structure, you start to basically go more deep into the position, and you start to see more ideas that you haven't seen before. Now that helps you build your intuition, and that helps you basically find more plans in general in any position. And now that goes into basically helping you try to find out what move to play. Now when you try to find a piece activity and try to compare them for different pieces, you start to see what plans you could sort of build with the pieces you have right now, how you can improve them and choose between those options and move forward. And again, you'll also start seeing what your opponent's pieces can do and if he has any threats. So again, by just evaluating positions and getting the feel for them, I feel like it opens up a whole new door on like covering a bunch of other stuff. Like you probably heard, hey, always look out for what your opponent wants to do. Hey, always look for checks, captures, and attacks. And by just evaluating the position, I feel like you sort of get to cover all these stuff unconsciously. And that's what's happened for me in the past few weeks, because I've tried out this checks captures attacks method. I've tried out trying to scan what your opponent is trying to do next and stop his plan, and it was hard for me to juggle between all of these. And once I ran into this like evaluating positions technique, I realized this kind of engulfed all everything for me, like all these ideas. So I wanted to share the same thing with you, and this has definitely helped me become a better chess player. So if you want to just like get less stuck in most positions, like especially that opening to middle game phase, just practice on evaluating positions. And of course, this might not be enough time in blitz games, and that's totally understandable. Perhaps maybe play rapid games, or maybe just take a look at other master games, just one game a day when you have a free time, or just pull up any position and just practice your evaluation, and then go on and play a couple blitz games. And this might be difficult at first, but if you get into the habit of evaluating positions, you'll start to see quickly, okay, like, oh, king safety, piece activity, and then all these plans will start to flow out. And in general, you'll figure out what to move in any position much more quicker. And once you get better at this, your speed chess will also improve much like quickly, especially under time scrambles. You'll constantly adapt to the dynamic positions when things are changing. You'll quickly also be changing your evaluations and hence changing your plans, and this will make you a much better chess player. So that's it for today's video. I hope you learned how to figure out what to move in any position, and see you next time. Bye.